And we are gonna get started here. Thank you all for joining us. As always, are we echoing? Okay. Here at the office, I want to make sure that we are on time and that we get right to business. Got a lot of stuff to talk about, important things, but we're not too important to not open up with prayer. So we're going to ask our Religious Affairs Chair, our Executive Committee member, our Minister Bridget Edwards, to open us up. If you will, Minister Edwards.
Thank you, Madam President, and to all assembled. Let us go to the throne of grace. Eternal God, we are grateful for yet another day. Now, Father, we come in this monumental moment, asking that you would allow your spirit to be in our midst. Tonight, God, we understand that your word tells us in all of our getting for us to get understanding. So we pray tonight as we sit, oh God, and listen to these panelists that we would gain a greater understanding of our rights. We ask these in all blessings in thy darling son, Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. And so we want to make sure with everything that's going on that we understand exactly where we are. Information has come in different forms. You've got different people telling different stories as to what happened. Depends on what lawyer you talk to. We met with our chief of police of Fort Lauderdale, who has a whole different kind of idea as to what happens with the police review boards. And so says he doesn't really know what to do, but he's all in the hands of his legal department. And then they have several people who are reaching out to other people who are trying to determine next steps, because there is in the city of Fort Lauderdale, there's a citizens review board. It kind of, it doesn't have any teeth. It's really nothing, but they want to determine if they need to get rid of the nothing that is in place now, and then what happens then. And so we want to make sure that the correct information is distributed, certainly from the NAACP and all of our partners. Pamela, I absolutely drive Judge Holmes up the wall, around the wall, over the house and back again, getting her legal opinion and reading, and so just know that every time you send an email, Judge Holmes gets a phone call and asking her, and since I have driven by law school and never went in, she actually went in. She has to deal with well, what about this? And that sort of thing. But we all got questions about what about this and what happens now. I want to introduce our team as well. I mentioned Judge Alona Holmes, who serves after an illustrious career on the bench. If you've been anywhere, probably in Florida, you know her. You know of her. If you didn't, then you're in for a treat if you don't. And then we certainly have our Broward County, although we do say it's ours, we mean me and judges, the Broward County public defender here, and who works closely with us, making sure that justice comes in to all of the people in a very fair way. So I just want to do, before I ask Pamela to also on here, we'll have our first Vice President, Sonia Burrows, and of course, Minister Edwards. But I want to have Judge Holmes just say a couple of things since she's been having to listen and tolerate me and understanding what this is for a couple of minutes, and then we'll move on to Mr. Weeks. And before I let Pamela introduce some good friends that she brought to us and to help our community. Judge Holmes, if you will.
All right. Good evening to everyone, and to our illustrious panelists. It's an honor for me to even be in the same frame with you all, some of you. So I said some of you. So well, there are a couple of concerns as the community is involved, and specifically Black and Brown people, with the legislation that's been passed with regard to the citizen review panels. Fort Lauderdale is one of the municipalities, but as I told President Ellison, their ordinance really had no teeth when it began. And so they just found another dentist to pull out the gums now. Broward County has a citizens advisory board, so to speak. And I serve as a representative for the NAACP on that board. And that board was never a punitive review board. In other words, it was never convened to review the actions of law enforcement and then to recommend firing, suspension, or anything like that. The only thing that the board does is gather data. And from that data, it makes a recommendation to the county commission. But there are other citizen review boards that have teeth around the state. I believe there were at least 23 of them, and a memo went out regarding the legislation. So, Pamela, thank you for including me in the email. I actually get 2 or 3 of the same emails. Madam President, make sure that I get them. So it's important, to find out your thoughts on that. And if time permits, and only if time permits, I'd like to try to discuss Senate Bill 184. And that's the addition to Florida Statute 843.31, and the no-go legislation of how close you can be to a police officer and film them. But the matter at hand really is, where do we go from here? If the citizens have no say in the activities and how police officers are treated, we've gone back to the slave codes at this point. And if citizens can't recommend and say or do anything regarding wayward police officers. So to that end, that's why we're here tonight. So, Madam President, you want to turn it over to Ms. Birchford, or I'll turn it back over.
We're going to go next to, thank you, Judge, and we are going to go to Mr. Weeks, our duly elected public defender. Mr. Weeks, if you please.
Madam President, I really appreciate this opportunity to be on this panel, to share this space with all these great legal minds is very important. But more importantly, have conversations about things that are important to our community. And for that, we have our NAACP that is going to always bring the legal issues before the community so we can hear them, we can understand them, and more importantly, we can be empowered with the knowledge on how to address the shifting landscape that exists in our community. It seems like every time we collectively come together and take a few steps forward, we see some progress. We see things that maybe some light in the horizon. Then there's a lot of maneuvering behind that to close those gaps. And we have to always have those conversations because this is an ongoing struggle. I do not want anybody to believe that we have won any battles. The battles are ongoing. They will continue. And the only way that we will prevail is if we stay diligent, we stay educated on the issues, and we come together and talk about them all the time so we can educate more folks so they can make more decisive decisions when it comes time to vote. So I appreciate the NAACP to have this conversation. I'm looking forward to the dialogue because I have my thoughts, but I know that each attorney can see things a little bit differently, and I'm looking forward to having a robust discussion on these issues. So thank you once again for allowing me to participate.
And next we'll have Ms. Pamela Birchford, who is the Florida State Conference as a whole, and individual units that whether it be adult branches, college chapters, youth and college division, high school chapters, whomever, we have a go-to who really works with the NAACP, both the local, state, and on a national level, to make sure that we do everything we can to fight against the bad bills that are happening. And so even though they come through and end up and they're really terrible, they started out a lot worse. And thanks to Pamela Birchford and her speaking and working on behalf of the NAACP every day in Tallahassee. We have been able to do things that normally we wouldn't have. And other organizations want to do that, and they don't. And so she is actually priceless when it comes to the NAACP and the work that it does. And so with that, we certainly thank you for all that you do daily, because I know I'm not the only one that calls. And so, because we got concerns and we need the correct answers and all of the unintended and intended consequences as we move forward. So with that, Pamela, if you will say a few words and then introduce the team. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Madam President, and I appreciate being invited here this evening. This will be a robust discussion that very definitely needs to take place. I have invited along with me my co-conspirators who are on the ground with me in Tallahassee, walking the halls, knocking on doors, stepping up to the mic in committee meeting rooms, preparing members for activities on the floor, and then taking our case to the governor on many different occasions. Joining me this evening is Kara Gross. Kara is the Legislative Director and Policy Counsel for ACLU Florida. We also have Abdila Skur, who is the Policy Strategist and Troublemaker at ACLU Florida. And we have with us Jonathan Weber, who is the Policy Director for Southern Policy Law Center. We all participated very specifically in addressing House Bill 601 and its counterpart and Senate Bill 184. Those two bills taken together really put our community at risk. And it puts us in the position where we will have a more difficult time being able to discern police misconduct or do anything about it when it occurs. Now, before we get into the meat of the discussion of this bill, I want to just take a few minutes to talk about the playing field, because I think it is important that your members understand what we're dealing with in Tallahassee, aside from these bills. After the 2022 election, the GOP holds a supermajority status in both chambers. Now, I know this is a nonpartisan discussion, but tonight we're going to talk realities. And so I'm going to have to talk about who's there and who's not there. So the
Please.
GOP holds this supermajority status in both chambers. And while we've seen supermajority status in one chamber or the other, it is the first time there has been a Republican supermajority in both chambers simultaneously since Democrat control ended in 1992. There are 120 members of the Florida House of Representatives. 84 of those members are Republicans, and 36 of those members are Democrats. Of the 40 members of the Florida Senate, only 12 are Democrats. Now, in addition to the legislative supermajority, the entire supporting cast is Republican. Every statewide office holder is a Republican. The entire Florida cabinet, the Commissioner of Agriculture, the Chief Financial Officer, and the Attorney General of Florida. Both U.S. senators are Republican. And 6 out of 7 of the Florida Supreme Court justices are Republicans, with one designated and defined as a moderate. So, if you get the picture, you understand that this legislature can pass anything it wants to, anytime it wants to, and any way it wants to. That said, our job is to get the legislature to focus on what the people want and what the people need. Now, that can be a challenging to impossible task. What we've seen under the DeSantis administration is the legislature simply following the governor down the yellow brick road. The governor has inured so much power in the appointment process, placing members on the judicial nominating councils who choose the judges that support the governor's programs. Doing what the governor wants can be very lucrative. We've seen that in many of his appointment processes. So, with all this power and the power of the executive office and a supermajority legislature, there is no such thing as bipartisanship. Does not exist in the Florida legislature. So with little to no bipartisanship, we have to make our case everywhere we go. There are, however, members in the legislature who represent the communities you live and work in. They know the circumstances you often face. We count on these members to step up and speak up for you. Often that's the case, but not always. So tonight we're going to get into the meat of these two bills. We'll start with 601 since that is the main subject of conversation here, but we do want to leave a little time to talk about 184 because that is something that many of you out there in the public will encounter. So Abdillah, if you will go through the provisions of 601 for us so that our audience will understand what the bill currently provides for.
Thank you so much, Pamela. Hello, everyone. My name is Abdillah. As Pamela said, I'm a policy strategist at the ACLU of Florida. I'm very honored to be here talking to you all today about these bills. So let's back up a little bit and look at the history of civilian review boards. There are 23 different municipalities that have some sort of civilian review board throughout the state. These came in different fashions. For example, in Miami, it was established in 2001 after a string of officer-related shootings of Black men and about a dozen instances of police planting evidence on suspects. In Broward County, where you all are, you may know, in 2020, the review board there was established after the murder of George Floyd and the movement for Black lives and call for increased police transparency, because ultimately that is what improves public safety, having trust and transparency between police and the community. And so, like many things in Florida, it's not uniform across the board. Some review boards have the ability to review specific instances of police brutality, for example. That's not the case in Broward County, is my understanding. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But what the Broward County Review Board does do is it looks at policies and procedures and can make recommendations. And the important thing to remember here is that at no point in the state has a review board had the legal authority to discipline an officer. And that is, I feel the need to point that out because throughout the process, when the bill sponsors and supporters of this bill were pushing it through in committee and on the floor, there were references to, bullying police officers or targeting and harassing them with these review boards, when that's not the case. I personally don't think that someone should feel threatened by a group of community members coming together and looking through best practices and seeing what works, what can we do better to increase transparency and make sure that the community and the members of those communities trust law enforcement to do their jobs and to keep them safe. And so as this bill was moving through, you know, as Pamela mentioned, the bipartisanship or lack thereof in a lot of these bills, and that is the case. You know, a lot of times legislation is just rammed through. Public speakers are given maybe a minute to speak about what's wrong with the bill. They have to travel all the way to Tallahassee. I'm sure some folks drove from Broward County to Tallahassee to speak on this bill. And it was really interesting in the committee meetings, seeing some of the arguments for this bill, some of the statements made in support of this bill, and in some cases, interestingly enough, members of committees kind of picked arguments and fights with people who came up to speak from organizations like the ACLU of Florida, Florida Rising, literally kind of just arguing back and forth from the podium. And it's, you know, it's kind of conversations that might be better suited for a private meeting, but you know, that's neither here nor there. Who am I to say? So let's go through some of the provisions of this bill. So whereas before, localities could create a review board by ordinance or charter amendment or ballot initiative from the people. That is how Broward County's was established, was a municipal ordinance, I believe, in 2020. Now it requires, it says that county sheriffs and chiefs of municipal police departments can create civilian oversight boards. And those boards will have 3 to 7 members, including at least 1 retired law enforcement officer. And up to 3 of those members are to be appointed by the sheriff or the chief of police themselves. How does the saying go? We've investigated ourselves and found no wrongdoing, right? So it really is hard to take seriously the findings of a group of people when they're being stacked by people who have, let's be honest, an incentive to show that there is nothing wrong with the police forces that they are in charge of. So it also amends the law that to clarify that complaints against law enforcement officers must follow a uniform process across the state. Those are the major items in this bill. Now, during the process, unfortunately, while media was covering this bill, you know, media reporters aren't policy experts, right? So sometimes they may say something or they may write something and then that kind of just spirals from there. So for a while, news outlets were reporting that this would outright ban civilian review boards. That's not the case. And you know, there were many people who were concerned that this would severely hamper the ability of civilian review boards to do their job. But as my colleague Kara will point out in just a little bit, that isn't necessarily the case. And Pamela mentioned a memo that went out earlier this week to those review boards and attorneys that we'll get into. I just did quickly want to go through the votes on how this went, because it is important to know how your representatives voted on specific legislation. And so I'm just going to really quickly share my screen here. Let's see, share screen, and here. Okay. And so let me know, give me a thumbs up if you can see the, okay, perfect. All right, so this is actually the wrong, there we go. So this is HB 601. And these are the members of the Broward delegation that voted no on the bill. And that's a good thing. They voted no against this bill because passing this bill would decrease transparency and trust between law enforcement and the community. And so these, I went through and members of the Broward delegation who voted no are right there. There was, I believe, 13 members of the Broward delegation in both the Senate and the House. And if you'll notice, you might notice that those are all representatives, even though this passed in both the House and the Senate. And that's because, I will show you in just a second, this passed the Senate almost unanimously. There was only one no vote in total against this bill in the Senate, and that one no vote wasn't in the Broward delegation. So Representatives Campbell, Castle, Daley, Dunkley, Gottlieb, Panchovsky, Robinson, Williams, and Woodson all voted no on this bill, and that's a good thing. These are the members of the Broward delegation who voted yes on this bill. That means that they voted to, in their eyes, limit the abilities of civilian review boards. That's Senator Lauren Book, Senator Rosalind Osgood, Senator Jason Pizzo, Senator Tina Polsky. Like I said, almost every member of the Florida Senate voted in favor of this bill. And Representative Robin Bartleman and Representative Chip LaMarca also voted yes on this bill. And so it is important that we hold our elected officials accountable and have that conversation with them if you disagree with their vote. Ask them, why did they vote in favor of this bill? Why did they vote against this bill? Because it is important that no matter who you are, what the bill is, that you're able to justify your vote when a constituent asks. And so with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Kara. Let me just stop sharing my screen here. I'll turn the mic over to my colleague, Kara, to go over the memo that was released earlier this week with the great help of our legal departments. And yeah, take it from there.
Great. Thank you so much, Abdila, and thank you so much to all of you for having us here. We really appreciate it. And I just want to take a moment to just say how wonderful it is to get to work with Pamela every day at the Capitol, because as you all know, she is fabulous. So thank you, Pamela, for inviting us here as well. So there has been a lot of confusion about this bill and about the impact of the bill. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. And my goal here is to try and clarify some of the confusion around the bill and to answer any questions that folks may have about the bill and about its impact. As we have heard, a lot of the media that has talked about the bill and a lot of discussion during the committee hearings were about how this would disband and dissolve and be the end of civilian review boards. And what we want to say is that it is not the end of civilian review boards, and that is a misinterpretation or misrepresentation of what the actual impact of this bill will be. And that is a good thing, because we don't want a bill to pass that is going to disband civilian review boards. What I will also say is that civilian review boards, unfortunately, already are very limited in what they can do, just like Broward's is very limited in what it can do in the sense that it can't do investigations. Most of the civilian review boards across the state, the 23 of them, Miami's is a little bit different, but all of the others besides Miami, and Miami with an asterisk, don't have the power to investigate. So they cannot investigate complaints. That is already in Florida statutes. The Police Officer Bill of Rights has already prevented CRBs from doing that. So those powers didn't exist for CRBs and for CRBs, civilian review boards. For any civilian review boards that were already in existence, presumably they were already compliant with current Florida statutes, so they weren't investigating anyway. So what this bill does is it says that you can't receive complaints, you can't investigate. And all of the rhetoric was about how we don't want to have, civilians, communities reviewing and investigating officers. We don't want them to have that power and that authority. It's as if the people that were drafting the bill didn't understand that CRBs already don't have that authority. And that's probably true. They probably didn't understand that. They probably understood that it was important to do something to CRBs. It was important to do something. The police and law enforcement and their lobbying association, they work hard in Tallahassee to pass legislation that is supportive of them. And in the translation between, we want something that is supportive of us, we don't want all this accountability, we don't want the public investigating us, all of that, they came up with this legislation that really just mirrors what the Police Officer Bill of Rights already has in Florida statutes. So therefore, it doesn't have much impact on currently existing civilian review boards, presuming that they were already compliant with Florida statutes, which if they weren't compliant, then they would already have been out of compliance. And we haven't heard of any. I'm sure if there were ones that were investigating when they couldn't have, we would have heard about that, but we have not heard of those. So that is the first thing I wanted to make sure that everybody kind of understands. So the reason we drafted this guidance memo is because we wanted to get out in front of this narrative that's being created that civilian review boards need to immediately dissolve, or that they can't go on, or that their powers have been gutted, because that is just not what the legislation says. Maybe that's what some people thought they were passing, but that's not what ultimately got passed. And I think that it's important to sort of spread this word, because if we don't get out in front of it, you can imagine that it is to the people who want to see civilian review boards go away, it is to their advantage to say, well, the legislation made it go away, so now you have to disband, without actually, reading the legislation, looking at what it actually says, comparing it to what their review board does, and then making that determination. So when we looked at what the legislation actually does, we found that it just mirrors the already prohibitions that are already in Florida statutes, to the extent that anybody was receiving complaints before. Florida statutes already required that those complaints be sent to the law enforcement agency that conducts the investigation. So that is not new. That is already in Florida statutes, and that was already the process. What most civilian review boards do, as we talked about, and as Broward's does, and I'm sorry, I'm not as familiar with Fort Lauderdale's, but I did take a look at Broward's before this one. They do best practices, they talk about policies, they give recommendations. All of those things are still, there's nothing in this legislation that seems to prevent any of that from happening. There's nothing that says they can't make recommendations. There's nothing in here that says that they can't, look at policies, that they can't look at best practices, that they can't make those recommendations. So all of that is exactly the same. What I also wanted to mention is that the legislation is specific to ordinances. So notably, it says that you can't have any ordinance. It does not say that you can't form a civilian review board by any other means. So there are some civilian review boards that are formed by charter amendments. There are other civilian review boards that were formed initially by an executive order of the mayor. There are some civilian review boards that may now be moving towards having their civilian review board by resolution, just to, because they can, and they know that they have the votes that they can do that. But for the majority, they are done by ordinance, and based on the current Florida statutes, which already limit the ability and authority and the empowering of civilian review boards to investigate, they didn't have that already, and so this does not impact that. There is a provision in here that talks about, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more, that talks about how civilian review boards can be created by the sheriff, and how they have to have a certain number of people on them, and they have to be appointed, and there's a process that's outlined in here. There's nothing in here that says that's the only civilian review board that you can have. What it says is that they can create it if they want to create it. Again, this is just duplicative because they could have created it before if they wanted to also. So it's just outlining that they can do what they already were empowered to do anyway, so it doesn't actually change anything on that front as well. What I imagine we'll see is that I'll imagine a couple of things we'll see. We're going to see, and we already have been seeing people saying, well, because this bill has passed, because it's signed into law, you can't have your civilian review board anymore. So we want to empower people with this guidance memo to be able to say, hey, here's the memo, and apparently I can, and let's move from there. The other thing that we want to be able to do is that, if people are trying to make it in the media that, oh, well, we can't do this anymore. We want to be able to say, hey, here's this guidance memo, media, stop reporting that way because you're sending a misimpression to the public about these. So that's kind of the purpose of the guidance memo. And I'm sure folks have questions about it, which we're happy to answer any. I put it in the chat along with our press release, and happy to answer any questions as well. I don't know if we want to cover that now or if we want to move on to SB 184, but I defer to you all on that.
Gordon, I see you scooting.
Madam President, the question is why? Why are we doing all this? Why go back after communities all across the nation saw what was going on with law enforcement and how they were interacting with their respective communities, and then champion their local governments to establish civilian review boards? They did it not only in Broward, not only in Florida, but all across the nation. This was a compelling movement that communities are saying, hey, there's already a process in place to make a complaint against abusive behavior for law enforcement. But sometimes those things they're not transparent. We don't know what happens because there are rules that say if that investigation is pending, that they don't have to disclose it. And then time goes by and the next thing happens and you forget about the last thing, you move on to the next thing, and then eventually you never figure out what happened. So communities all across the country, this community, Florida, said, hey, let's get a group of folks that are civic minded, and let's take a look at these things every now and again, and then make recommendations back to law enforcement about policy. Hey, maybe you guys should put body cameras on everyone. Good idea. Let's put that into place. Let's advocate for that. Let's get the funding, put it into place. Hey, maybe you should look at your use of force matrix and try to de-escalate first before you just jump in and, tussle with someone. Common sense, feedback from the community to law enforcement on policing practices. That's what the civilian review boards were for. So why would we have to go through this whole process to confuse, to distract? Because there was that messaging throughout this process. Oh, we're getting rid of civilian review boards. We're getting rid of them. Because now the power is in with the sheriff and law enforcement to establish these boards. And if you thought that they were getting rid of them, then we would be back to the dark ages where no one knew what happened with the police misconduct. So this is, and I'm glad you guys started this off with the legislative breakdown. That was very important because it puts the proper context for this conversation. If we want to advance the relationship between law enforcement and our community, we have to be more transparent. We have to invite more people into the conversation of how law enforcement interacts in our respective communities to give feedback. And the reality is that every community is different. Remember, politics is local. What happens in our community may be a little bit different than a community 200 miles up the road or 50 miles down the road. So they should be able to make decisions that are different because of their communities. So we got to really, and that's why I am so happy and honored to be a member of the NAACP, because these are the kind of conversations we have to have. Because the key is to misinform, to distract, and to get us off of the issue of how our communities are policed. That is not a one-way conversation where law enforcement tells us what they're going to do. It's a two-way conversation between the community and law enforcement having a dialogue about what police practices should be expected in their community and how people should be treated with some dignity and respect. So I appreciate you for clearing this up. And I see Judge Holmes' hand is raised, so I'm going to turn over the floor because, I'm on my soapbox and I'm just so incredibly upset about this. I'm upset.
Well, I want to, before Judge, I want to thank, I'm glad to see Broward County Sheriff's candidate Al Pollock on, because, I would be texting, calling that, because we certainly want to know where you are on these things, Mr. Pollock. So I appreciate you being a part of this. I will certainly, we will be having a forums, and certainly one for the sheriff, because we want to know where all the candidates stand on these issues, because it's certainly going to affect our community in a very mighty way. Judge Holmes.
I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but Mr. Weber had his hand up, and then I want to address why we had, I don't think he had his hand up. He put something in the chat, so I don't want to cut him off from saying it. And then I'll address why the legislature just went up and for 60 days just did exercises in redundancy. So, Mr. Weber, I don't want to cut you off. You had something you wanted to say.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo what's already been said, and just, what I put in the chat was building trust between law enforcement and the people they are supposed to serve and protect is paramount. I am really not sure how this bill helps that, but that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Well,
he does it.
You really have to listen when the governor or Paul Renner, who is the Speaker of the House, or Ms. Perdomo, who is the President of the Senate, when they say certain things, you really should listen. During the time after the George Floyd murder, and after the Chauvin, after Mr. Chauvin was convicted, law enforcement officers started resigning and retiring in droves, okay? And your governor went on the news and said, come to Florida. We want you here. We have a place for you. So you all go back through the archives and you listen carefully. So this was just the dog whistle sounding. Okay, we got rid of everything that could point out that you may have done something bad in your arrest, excessive use of force, you killed somebody just yesterday. And I saw it on the news before logging on here. A man was killed, knee on the neck. The same way George Floyd was killed. So they're still doing it. But your governor said, we want you here in this state. And so to make it palatable, to make it seem so welcoming, we got rid of citizen review boards. They can't review what you're doing. We have a law now that says they can't get within 25 feet of they can't film you. So this is the welcome place. So we're going to get some bad actors. We already have bad actors here. They're just going to act out a little bit more because they feel that there is nothing to shield us from them. So we all have to be very vigilant and know their devices. Yes, those of us who are lawyers, who read the statutes, who know, we didn't need half the stuff that they passed. We already had a thou shalt not on the books, okay? We have 843 on the books, okay? One of the hardest convictions to get, we waste time because citizens don't know what the lawful execution of a duty is, and judges, we're given that instruction, and it makes, all you can tell them is officers can make arrests, okay? So, 843 is just a catch-all. But to add this nonsense, and I don't want to get ahead of you all. I want to let the subject matter experts, but if I had to make a ruling, I would have already stricken it down. Let somebody get arrested because it's void for vagueness. Okay, so especially when we get to the definition, and I'd like to read the definition of harassment in 184 for y'all. I'll read it as it's written, but I'm going to add my Alona Holmes flavor to it. But that's the reason we have 601, 184, is to bring in these bad actors, to make Florida seem like a haven. You know, I think our state was originally set up, if you go way back in our history, for debtors. People who were in debtors prison in Georgia came to Florida, so they wouldn't have to, you know, go to jail. So now we've changed things around. You know, people should read the history of this state. We used to lead the nation in lynchings of Black people. So Florida is just not, you know, we just started and we're a vacation haven. Florida has always been oppressive to people, Black and brown people. So we just have to be vigilant. And thank you, ACLU, for your memo. Hopefully it'll get in the hands of the media. The media is a business, and they're driving things. And so all they want to do is get advertisers, you know, get that money for advertisement. They're really not concerned with reporting accurately. And that's something. So that's why I appreciate so much the NAACP. We're not trying to get advertisers. We're trying to just get information out to people who will sit and listen, and even go on when we put this webinar on our website, that they will go on and listen and get knowledge, because knowledge is power. Okay, and so once you know, you know. So thank you, Madam President Ellison, for this fantastic discussion, and for our panelists tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. There were two others, Pamela and Adela.
I think we're getting closer to that church sermon. I want to say that law enforcement in Florida is very powerful in the halls of the legislature. This is an election year, and they showed up in full force this year. I don't think we saw as many of them last year as we saw this year. It was very insulting. I can't think of a better word, but it was very insulting sitting in committee to hear the discussion around this bill. What the law enforcement units were telling us is that we don't have anything to worry about. The FDLE can investigate. We have internal affairs to investigate. You know, the sheriff investigates. All of these investigations going on. So as long as the fox is guarding the hen house, you don't need to be concerned. That was the message we got from listening to testimony on 601. I want to remind everybody that when the governor invited law enforcement from other states to come here, he paid them a bonus with our tax dollars. That's even more insulting. And we are moving closer to a police state than we may even recognize. Let's not forget, we have a state guard, a private militarized unit under the sole control of Governor DeSantis. We have given that unit over $107 million to buy aircraft, maritime craft. They will have a whole new built training unit. And I don't even think that they've reached the magic number of 400 rather than what they've extended it to 1,500. But they can do whatever the governor sends them to do. And they can have, there's a specialized unit there that can have weapons and assist the sheriffs and police chiefs. We also have the Office of Election Crimes and Security, another law enforcement unit that was designed to hunt and arrest unsuspecting voters. So we have to be vigilant. We have to take care. And we have to continue to show up in the legislature to make our voices heard. And maybe before this year is over, the NAACP may have to reissue its travel advisory. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Madam Chair, Madam President, may I chime in on this point?
Yes, please.
You know, we're talking about the civilian review boards, but we also got to talk about this, this first responder 25-foot barrier that they've created. Logistically, how's that gonna work? You know, they have basically empowered law enforcement to say there's a 25-foot ring, invisible ring that surrounds them, that when they tell you to step back, you have to step back past that ring. And if you impede or encroach upon that ring, you're gonna be in handcuffs and you have to explain it to the judge down in court. Why? We already had a law that was that's been on the books for a long time that already addressed anyone interfering with the officer executing their legal duty, making an arrest or conducting an investigation or putting, information together. They already had a rule on that. Why did they create this rule? Because there is a chilling effect. They're messaging that law enforcement has great power, but also great protection around them. Implicit protection, the protection of the law, the protection of the government around every law enforcement. When they say step back, they mean step 25 feet back. What message is that sending to all of the families, all the loved ones that have been abused in the streets, that have had negative encounters, that say, I just want to record this for my safety and for the safety of my loved ones, so I can memorialize this event to make sure that won't be my word against their word. I will have some empirical evidence to show what happened. They are trying to literally seize the power back and relegate folks into a position where you just have to submit to the authority of power. And that is a very, very slippery slope that we are treading on in Florida. And this is the building blocks that you see with authoritative type governments, that they start with encapsulating the power in law enforcement, and then moving to speech, and then moving to organization and presence to protest, putting barriers in place to vote, poll taxes, electoral challenges, redistricting. All of that is designed to encapsulate power. And that's why the beginning of this video was the most important part. The power has already been encapsulated into a segment. And now we're seeing what happens when you have all of that power in a particular place. These types of legislative actions, these types of laws start the building blocks for authoritative rule.
But you know what? I don't want anybody that's listening and looking tonight to lose hope. This is not the first time that we've been confronted with this. Somebody said the same thing in 1954. But a young man by the name of Thurgood Marshall still went up to Washington, D.C. and argued a position that wasn't popular at the time. And it struck a chord in the mind of a very conservative Chief Justice. So we're not ignorant of their devices. I don't ever lose hope, because I look at the legislation that comes through. There's going to be a judge somewhere. And yes, Pamela, you are correct with these JNCs and the types of judges. They just seem to lift them off of the Federalist Society's membership rolls. But that's okay, because there is still hope, because you're going to strike a chord even with the most conservative person. They're going to be touched in some way. So we just have to stay vigilant. So, Madam President, can I read what you can't do to law enforcement real quick?
Go right ahead.
All right, here we go. This legislation takes effect on January 1st, 2025. So we got some breathing room for a minute. But they're already doing it anyway out there. Get back. They set up the police tape anyway, more than 25 feet away. But you know what? We have an ally in this fight, because this also will apply to the news media. So they won't be able to get their close-ups. So we'll be spending some of their money going to court to try to knock this down. But this law applies to first responders who are law enforcement officers, correctional probation officers, firefighters, and emergency medical care providers, those EMS people, that you cannot harass them. Harass is defined as willfully engage in a course of conduct directed at a first responder, which intentionally causes substantial emotional distress in that first responder and serves no legitimate purpose. So you got some eggshell officers out here. If somebody like me can approach them and they get emotionally distressed, I can't wait for this to hit a courtroom. It is unlawful for a person, after receiving a verbal warning, not to approach from a person he or she knows or has reason to believe, reasonably should know, is a first responder who is engaged in the lawful performance of a legal duty to knowingly and willfully violate such warning and approach or remain within 25 feet of the first responder with the intent to, 1, impede or interfere with the first responder's ability to perform such duty, 2, threaten the first responder with physical harm, or 3, harass the first responder. A person who violates this subsection commits a misdemeanor of the second degree, punishable, and they give the statute, but second degree misdemeanors are 60 days in the county jail and a $500 fine plus court costs. I yield the floor. I'm laughing.
You don't want to do 60 days in Broward County Jail because it might be your last days with what's going on down there.
Yeah, that's true. You go in and you come out in a body bag. Yeah, we got that problem down here too. But that is the statute as of January 1st, 2025. And the governor made a point of signing it. I believe he signed it in Broward County. So I yield to the SPLC or the ACLU. Y'all take it away from their children.
I'll jump in now if that's all right.
Yeah. Right ahead.
Got it. Thank you so much. So first of all, I just want to say good evening, everyone. My name is Jonathan Weber. I'm the Florida Policy Director for the Southern Poverty Law Center and our sister organization, the SPLC Action Fund. It's a pleasure, of course, to speak with you all tonight. A quick note, while I do live in Tallahassee now, I am proudly from Broward County. I went to South Plantation High School, and so did my wife, so Broward will always be home for me, and I'm extra excited to speak to y'all when I saw it said Broward on the invite, so thank you so much. And thank you so much. Okay. So just to add on to what was just said, what this bill does, which it was SB 184, and just for those of you taking notes, the statute it created was 843.31, if you want to look it up once it becomes into law. So what this bill doesn't do is clarify if that at this 25-foot halo that's around the first responder, it doesn't clarify if it's from the point from where the verbal command was given, or if it follows the first responder throughout the crime scene or the active area, right? So imagine an officer dealing with a situation at, say, a concert or a crowded city street or some festival type situation. They give a command, people back up. The officer then starts to move about the area. Is that halo supposed to follow through the crowd? In practical use, how is it even possible? And how many of you are even confident that you could estimate what 25 feet is right now? I know myself, it's not, that's not exactly my specialty. I would probably have a tough time, especially in like a crowded situation, maybe at night, trying to figure out where exactly is 25 feet. So it's our job as advocates to think through like the worst possible scenarios for all of these bills. How could it go wrong, to see if we can try to plug those holes in the legislative process. So imagine a first responder says, stay back, and then proceeds to walk up to a person who might still be yelling. That person is now liable for arrest, which would be a second-degree misdemeanor. If the first responder changed the location of the amorphous, invisible 25-foot halo. This is a problem. It is not clearly defined in the bill. We argue that the bill would be better if the problem of whether the halo follows the officer or if it stays at the point of command was clearly spelled out, but they did not address those concerns, which we brought up numerous times. The vagueness remains. Also, another question we had is how would a command like this work in a place where there isn't physical space? For example, what if this command was given to people on the side of a highway in some sort of traffic accident or something like that, and you can't go into the highway? Or what if it was in a small apartment, or even worse, an apartment hallway where you physically, there's nowhere to go? Or what if it's even on a boat? What if you're on a boat? But before I even go any further on to kind of how some of the things we tried to do, I'd like to invite Kara could tell actually a quick story of where this actually was tried to be implemented in Florida before and how that went. Kara?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jonathan. For those who may recall, back in 2021, Miami tried to implement something very similar to this. So they had passed an ordinance, and during the discussions about the ordinance, there were discussions about, well, what about people filming? And the commissioners of Miami Beach were assured that this would have nothing to do with people filming. People, of course, would be able to film. It's their First Amendment right to be able to film officers, which is the same exact thing that they said here at the legislature. Well, of course, their First Amendment rights are protected. This isn't going to, supersede the Constitution. That's what they said in Miami. And within 1 month of passing this ordinance, 13 people were arrested under it. All of them were Black, and 8 of them were filming. And so this happened within 1 month of passing a very similar ordinance to what they're trying to do here at the state level. And after that month of seeing how this was being implemented, even though they were, assured that it wasn't going to result in arrests for filming, 8 people were arrested who were filming. They had to suspend the ordinance because they realized that it was not something that that law enforcement wasn't trained to understand, that they aren't supposed to arrest people who are exercising their First Amendment rights. So the disconnect between what they said it was going to do and then what happened within that 1 month period is obviously very concerning. Some of those officers were suspended from that, from a bunch of those incidences. But what is troubling about this is that, now we have a law that's passed that is going to make this for the entire state. So that was just, one city, Miami Beach, that they could not figure out a way to implement this without arresting so many people, all of them Black, 8 of them filming. And now they're going to do that across the entire state. So it is very concerning, and just wanted to give that little interlude. Jonathan, back to you.
Thank you so much. And one important note is that during the legislative process, the ACLU of Florida articulated that point specifically with that story in every single committee hearing, trying to persuade lawmakers to rethink this law. Obviously, we didn't get there, but so keep going on, because the story does get a little interesting. Is of course, the first thing that comes to mind when thinking about this bill is, why would first responders or police officers even need this law? Isn't disturbing or physically impeding a law enforcement official already probably illegal? Like, it definitely is. Or do they just not want people to see what's going on? And more insidiously, do they not want people to easily use their cell phone video cameras to record what's going on? The murder of George Floyd only became an international story because someone was able to be close enough to record with their cell phone. It's sickening to even think about the other victims of police abuse that went completely unnoticed and unreported over the decades and centuries because each of us didn't have these incredible, recording devices in our pockets at all times. So last year in 2023, my organization, Southern Poverty Law Center, we worked closely with the ACLU of Florida to draft an amendment that tried to help clarify some of these points in the bill. Unfortunately, the entirety of our amendment wasn't accepted, but thanks to the help of Broward's own Representative Mike Gottlieb, so if you see him, you can tell him, one important provision was put in the bill. The House bill sponsor, who was Representative Alex Rizzo from Miami, Republican, he was happy to accept this one line that explicitly stated that audio video recording and peaceful observation could never be construed as harassment. I'll say it again. The House bill sponsor, Republican Representative Alex Rizzo, allowed for an amendment that explicitly protected audio, video recording, and peaceful observation. This provision was included in the original draft of the bill this year. So as soon as the bill was filed in 2024, that line was in there. Rep. Rizzo, who I would say I have a cordial relationship with, told me numerous times that he thought it was a good ad and made the bill stronger. His main disagreement with the Senate bill was on the distance of the halo, not this though. To be clear, Senator Brian Avila, Republican for Miami, who was the Senate sponsor, he was less interested in our amendment and the specific audio video recording provision, repeatedly telling me and others that they didn't think it was necessary. So here we are moving through the legislative process. The House bill makes it to the very end to the floor. Senate bill makes it to the floor on their end. And we're in the last days of session, and the back and forth negotiations are really starting to heat up between the two chambers. They have to resolve the differences in the bill. The Senate sent their version of the bill over, which did not include the audio video protection. To combat this, we worked with Representative LaVon Bracey Davis from the Orlando area to add an amendment to reinsert that line in. In fact, it was the original line from the original bill that Representative Rizzo had filed, or very close to it. Rep. Rizzo on the floor said, I was there in the gallery, I watched it happen. Rep. Rizzo did not accept that amendment, but he promised on the House floor that it would come back for a final vote with the good language we wanted in it. I was there, we all saw it. You can probably see where this is going. That bill went back to the Senate to get fixed. The halo was instead extended to 25 feet from 14 feet is what it was in the Senate. It was 14, was extended to 25, and the audio video recording language was completely thrown out. The bill passed as is, and it was over. So what happened? It's hard to tell exactly what happened behind the scenes, but I will tell you that I believe Rep. Rizzo fully believed that the bill would come back to the House with the bare minimum protection in there for audio video recording. Something happened on the Senate side between Senator Avila and the Senate Democrats, and the bill wound up passing nearly unanimously in the Senate. Only one no vote in the Senate from Democrat Bobby Powell from up in West Palm Beach, who I believe won't be back next year in the Senate. I think he's running for county commission or something like that.
Yes.
And of course, we thank him for his leadership on that issue. The House was a little bit different, where the vote count was mostly partisan, only a handful of Democrats joining Republicans and voting yes on this bill. I think some might argue that peaceful audio video recording is reasonably protected by the Constitution of the United States, so why is it needed? Well, if that's true, we wouldn't have the story that Kara told just a minute ago. And lawmakers all the time add what they call comfort language just to make sure that the words aren't so vague and that is explicit so that any rookie law enforcement officer or firefighter or paramedic or even the 35-year-old veteran of any of these first responder systems, they know exactly what the law is. And that's what we wanted, was extreme clarity and explicitness when coming to people's First Amendment rights and the Constitution and the fundamental idea that we can watch, record, and observe police activity in our own communities. So due to the vague definitions in this bill and all this, it really kind of fell apart. And here we are waiting for it to be implemented starting January 1st, 2025. And that's where we're at. So thank you.
Now, everybody understood what we were saying. Everybody understood exactly what we were saying and why we were saying it. Yet and still, these provisions, as promised to us, did not get into the bill. As Jonathan indicated, the bill started out with a 14-foot halo. And during discussion, someone asked, well, how do we measure 14 feet? And the answer was, well, that's the average length of a car. And I'm thinking, well, you're talking about a little Kia, a Volkswagen, a Suburban, what is that? And there's just no explanation for many of the things that are in this bill. It was over a weekend when I got a call from a House member to say, hey, be prepared. They're going to file an amendment to extend this from 14 feet to 25 feet. They do these things when no one's around, no one's paying attention. And there they are in the bill. So we have a lot of work to do. We should be very mindful that next year, if the legislature realizes that they did not do what they thought they were doing with the citizen review boards, they could come back and rectify some of the mistakes they made. So we need to always stay on guard and to be ready to address these issues. So again, I want to thank Madam President for allowing us to talk out loud. Um, Abdillah, I know you have the slide on how the votes went down on 184. If you could put that up.
Yeah, please
I
show
think,
that.
I think
And
members
I
need
want
to
to add a
see it.
footnote that there was a Democrat that said that he thought that 250 feet would have been adequate
Yes.
for that. So you know, I'm scratching my head on this stuff too.
And did you name that Democrat?
That was Pizzo.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I can go through the votes here right now. So these are the members who voted no on SB 184. Representative Campbell, Representative Cassell, Daley, Dunkley, Representative Hunchofsky, Representative Robinson, Representative Williams, and Representative Woodson all voted no. And we thank them for this vote because Jonathan and Kara and Judge Holmes have gone through just how ridiculous and vague and unnecessary this bill was. So this is a good vote. Voting no on this means that people would have been able to hold police more accountable if there's anything going on, and not have that fear about being arrested for simply recording police, which, as Kara mentioned, is their First Amendment right. The courts have found time and again, you have a First Amendment right to film the public activities of police in their duties. And so I'll go over to the yes votes on this. And Senator Lauren Book, Senator Oslin Rosgood, Senator Jason Pizzo, Senator Tina Polsky, Representative Michael Gottlieb, and Representative Chip LaMarca all voted yes on this bill. And as Judge Holmes said, there was a moment where Senator Pizzo said, 250 feet is probably better. I believe he invoked 9/11 in one instance and said that, during 9/11, if a first responder said, get back, you would probably want to get back a mile or something like that. I don't think that was necessarily what this bill was supposed to cover. Who am I to say? But these are the votes. And again, this is something that no public official should have to shy away from from having to explain their vote to constituents. So if there is a representative or a senator here in your delegation that didn't vote the way that you believe they should have, you're totally within your rights to contact them, either write them, schedule a meeting with them, ask them why they voted the way that they did, and have that conversation. That's how democracy works. That is your right as a constituent. And that's your duty as a constituent, is to hold public officials accountable for the things that they do vote on. And just to kind of go back to an earlier question where Mr. Weeks asked why. Why are we passing these bills? For me, I think this applies to both bills that we've been talking about today. There's two kind of different angles coming at this. And the first is after the murder of George Floyd in 2020, and after an unprecedented call for police accountability and for justice for Black lives, and demanding that people acknowledge that Black lives matter, there had been a concentrated effort across the country to clamp down on reforms to the ways that police are held accountable and made transparent, because I guess in their opinion, it's out of line to question their authority, to question their actions, right? Some people describe it as backing the blue, so to speak. The other angle that I see is the power of police unions. These are all politicians, and the first thing on a politician's mind is how do they get reelected? That's the first thing that they think of as soon as they get elected, is how do they get reelected, right? So the police unions in this state and across the country have tremendous political power. And the largest supporters of both of these bills were the Fraternal Order of Police and the Police Benevolence Association. Those are the two largest police unions. And so, a lot of these public officials on both sides of the aisle I must do the calculus that says, well, I can have the support of this police union. They can help me in my reelection bid. And everything else is kind of, it comes out in the wash, right? So that's just me personally, how I see the issue, but others can disagree.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to weigh in? Judge?
You know what? I was just saying my prayer. Lord, fill my mouth with worthwhile stuff and nudge me when I've said enough. I think I've said enough tonight. Y'all pray for me.
Absolutely do that. I mean, we are, getting people to know this. I keep thinking about all the nuances that the video from the George Floyd murder, how different that is 25 feet away. Do we see his knee on his neck? Do we hear him asking for air? Do we see him, hear him begging for his life? And how that changes everything. I do know that one of the legislators said, well, they said you could still film. Yeah, I guess, depending on who's there, but that's the totally different thing than if you're filming, from, and I'm sure I've see videos all the time when they say, go in your house, leave, and you're on your porch. If they determine that that's too close, or if the halo's moving back and forth, it's just so much gray area there. It's just nothing good can come in this, and we know how negatively this will affect our community. So that's extremely troubling. But it's good to know. I mean, it's an election year. Who did what and who didn't. And so if I'm going to, why would I vote for you if you're going to vote the same way the other people vote? I mean, that's the way I look at it. I mean, we talk about accountability. Gordon?
Madam President, you hit the nail right on the head. We have so many issues going on in this community, and one of the challenges that we have when it comes to law enforcement is to rebuild trust. And trust is the covenant that we have in society between the awesome authority and power that we give law enforcement and us as community members to abide by the rules and the laws that we set to have a civil society. But the reality is that some of these covenants that we have entered into are starting to be stretched into the favor of law enforcement. And we as a community, and that's why I give great thanks to you as our president of the NAACP and to all the other civic-minded folks in the ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center and our legislative folks that are watching what's going on in Tallahassee, to have eyes on the ground, to have conversations, to remember. And Judge Holmes, you reminded me about hope. You reminded me about grace. You reminded me that although there's a lot of challenges that are on the horizon with the way that the legislative agenda is moving, that we are a people that will endure and we will prosper as a community when we come together. And that is the knowledge, that is the importance of having these conversations. That's the importance of sharing this legislative track so we can be prepared with information to do our work at the polls, to do our work to put forth good legislation, to do our work to find folks that are going to help lead this community, lead this site into a better place. So you are 100% right. We're going to be okay as a society because we have some very, very gifted, dedicated, compassionate people that are going to push this forward and push it in the right direction. But we cannot delude ourselves. They are working really hard on the other side too. They're working really, really hard to slow down any momentum that we gain as a community. When we started to recognize that law enforcement, there need to be some oversight or some eyes on law enforcement, body cameras, and the things that were just common sense, they got together and found strategies to undermine that. And we have to keep having these conversations about what is the best relationship we can have to have the safest community, but also a good relationship between law enforcement and the members of the community. And that's why these conversations are important. So, I endeavor to continue to be in the fight. We all get a little old. I'm getting a little older, but I still got a lot of fight in this dog.
You better speak for yourself.
I still got a lot of fight, and I know the folks on this particular Zoom also have a lot of fight. And there's a lot of people that's listening in the community that are still very passionate about how we are together. We are stronger together. We're strong when we communicate. We're strong when we have these dialogues. We're strong when we challenge each other to come to the best way to move forward. So I thank you, Madam President. I thank NAACP. I thank Southern Poverty Law Center. I thank the ACLU and all of you for coming together to have this conversation, because this will be memorialized on the internet and folks will be able to view this for time to come. And we still have future legislative sessions that are coming up. And we still can go back and try to address some of these erroneous bills or erroneous legislation, try to get them back on the right track. So hope is not lost. We just have to remind you where we were at, that we got to get the fight going. We got to get the energy pumping. We got to get our minds wrapped around the battle that's ahead. But we're not afraid of it, and we're going to still go and do it, and we're going to give our best at it. So I appreciate this conversation. Y'all will have me anytime y'all need me. I will be there, and we can push this forward together. So thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. And Sonia Burrows, our first vice president, and we need to have a forum with these folk that voted against these and let them explain to us why they cast the votes that they did, many of which are on the ballot in just a few months. I'm sure that will come up in several forums by even ours and the other organizations as well, because this is a very troublesome. So is this something I want to vote for you again? Robin Barnum, and I know she has an opponent, but if you're gonna vote the way that he votes, how's that helpful to our community? And so and I'm using her as an example, but obviously there are others as well. And so I certainly agree with that. Accountability is everything. And so staying informed, making sure that we govern ourselves accordingly, that we educate our community. Because usually, we have legal redress here, families call, and we have police misconduct issues, certainly in Broward County with all the different law enforcement agency, with BSO being the largest agency. We have issues with deaths in our jail. We're asking DOJ to come and investigate. You end up there. And you don't in too many cases, you don't come out alive. I've read the memo from the sheriff's office, and I saw him speak recently, and apparently it's all the people's mental ill. It's their own fault because they're mentally ill, and that's why they're dying in his jail, is basically what I got from that, from his listening to his speech, which is, again, as Mr. Weber said earlier, and others, that they investigated themselves and they found no wrongdoing, and which is what we hear all the time. And so I think I saw something with the ACLU, and said not only don't give up, but stay in the fight and work to make sure that these advisory boards exist in other spaces, with ACLU, with SPLC, with NAACP. Nobody said it was going to be easy, but it's certainly a necessary thing, and we intend to certainly keep doing that as well. I want to do each one of us do a 1-minute wrap up, final comments, whatever it is you wanted to share. This is not a one and done. I will be stalking Pamela tomorrow, because that's what we do for next steps as we continue to do this, and certainly for not just for Broward, but for our counterparts in the other counties as well. Pamela, you can start in any order you call it.
Well, thank you, Madam President. Yes, you and I will be talking tomorrow. We have a lot of things that we're fighting about: legislation, We remain in the courts. We have filed a reconsideration on our redistricting case, federal redistricting case that we lost. All of those things are very important. We are waiting for a ruling from the federal bench on the last elections bill that passed the legislature, Senate Bill 7050. We're very grateful that this year the legislature did not pass an elections bill. So we were able to have an elections without new provisions, even though we're trying to figure out what has happened in the past. But our democracy is at stake. All of these issues come together to threaten our democracy. This is the fight of our lives. If we don't have fundamental rights, it won't matter what the inflation rate is or whether we can pay for our insurance or not. We have to have our fundamental rights and we have to protect our democracy. So that is the message. That is what we are all engaged in. Again, I appreciate being here. I appreciate the great collaboration the NAACP has with ACLU and Southern Poverty Law. And of course, we have many other partners out there helping us in this fight. So thank you.
Thank you. Kara?
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to thank everybody here for having us, and we are fighting for all of these issues all the time with you. If there's anything that you need, you know how to reach us through Pamela or any other way. But we want to be a resource to all of you and help in any way we can. I do want to say with regard to SB 184, if history teaches us anything, when this goes into effect, there will probably be arrests. And we, reach out to us if there are issues like that, because our legal team will be investigating, and that's always good for us to know about so that we can think about that when we're thinking about potential litigation going forward. So thank you all very much and really appreciate being here.
Thank you. Abdullah?
Thank you, Madam President. Like Pamela said earlier tonight, this is a nonpartisan discussion, but it's important that we're realistic and we talk about the realities, right? So what I would say is that when we look at issues like the expansion of the police state, like the erosion of our basic freedoms, sometimes it's a bipartisan issue, unfortunately. And so we can't take anything for granted. And we need to hold public officials accountable for the votes that they do and demand that they explain why. And if that explanation isn't enough for you, hold their feet to the fire and demand that they do better the next time. I've been a big Spider-Man fan my whole life, and elected officials have a great power, and with that power comes the responsibility to do right by their people, to protect their freedoms, and to be good public stewards. And so that's my message is, democracy doesn't begin, it begins with voting, but it doesn't end with voting, right? So it's a whole process. And part of that process is, reaching out to your public officials and asking for that kind of dialogue. So that's what I'll leave with. And thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Yeah. So I'd like to start by extending, a sincere thank you to Ms. Marsha Ellison and the Broward NAACP leadership. Thank you. This is really an honor to be here tonight. Of course, I'd also like to thank our friend and fearless leader, Pamela Birch Fort, and my wonderful colleagues, Kara and Abdullah at the ACLU of Florida. We are a surprisingly, in some ways, small group of advocates in Tallahassee, but we are mighty and we are dedicated and we are there from early in the morning until late at night whenever the lawmakers are in the building. So we do, in some ways, need all the help we can get from people not in Tallahassee, but it goes both ways. So we need others, you need us, we need you. So count on us and we'll count on you, and we'll continue the march towards justice and equality together. That's the only way we're going to win, is by working together. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And I saw Letitia Newbold's hand up. Ms. Newbold, did you have a question? If you did, put your hand back up. I don't want to leave without you asking your question. I know you're all right. Okay, you should be able to speak now. Go right ahead. Are you able to unmute? Let's try this again. Okay, go right ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Go right
Okay,
ahead.
thank you. I just had a question because I had a
Tell us who you are before, because
I'm
I know
sorry.
that they don't.
I am the city commissioner for the city of Oakland Park, and I'm very involved with my residents. They, I'm so appreciative to be involved in this conversation, and it's funny because I just had a resident contact me yesterday looking for a civil rights attorney, and I've been searching and I've been looking, and I just really wanted to know if anyone, if you have a recommendation that I can send back out to the community, because apparently there was someone, they feel that they were wrongfully arrested. They were let go, and basically the case have been like dropped, like nothing's has happened. And they reached out to me seeking for representation for civil rights. Their civil rights were violated.
Does anyone want to answer that?
Ms. Newbo, can you contact the NAACP office like tomorrow's Friday, or by Monday, and
Just
I'll
text
get
me,
I'll
Commissioner.
get I'll
and
get
we'll
with Madam
coordinate.
President, and anybody that wants to that was on the panel. If you want to drop a DM, I shy away from recommending lawyers on screen and things like that, especially without knowing everything that needs to be done. So if you'll contact the office, we do have referral lists. We don't have lawyers on staff. I'm the only staff that the Madam President has, so she works me pretty good. But if you call, I'm pretty sure. So if anybody wants to DM or drop something in the chat, I know Ms. Newbo would be very happy to have that.
And
Thank you, Commissioner.
I'm sorry.
Go right ahead.
I understand, Judge Holmes, and I thank you for that. And I totally agree with what you said. And I will reach out to Madam President and just, at least put the individual in contact with someone, because I am one that if someone reaches out to me, even though I may not be the full answer, but I don't want them to, I let them know that I did try to connect them with the right person. So I thank you all for this conversation.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Okay, we'll go back to closing remarks. Gordon Weeks.
Madam President, I've said too much. I have, but I do want to say this one last thing. We're struggling in this state over homeowners insurance and housing availability for workforce housing. Yet we go up to Tallahassee and spend all this time on redundant legislation, to obfuscate and confuse the populace when it's around law enforcement issues. We got to get better priorities in the state. That's what I got to close with. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Judge Holmes.
I just want to thank everyone that's on this panel, especially Pamela Birchford. It has been my honor and privilege to just work with you. You're introducing me to some great, great people. I just want to thank you all for being in the fight. It is very easy to just sit at home and say, really, it doesn't affect me. But because you care, you're here. And I can't thank you enough. I never thought I'd be in the fight with the ACLU and the SPLC and speaking to Gordon Weeks and working with AKAs. But I'm telling you, adversity will bring you in company with some of the best fighters. So we're not worried about Goliath, because I'm doing the count of the boxes here tonight. I got my 5 stones here, so I'm ready to be in the fight. So thank you all from the bottom of my heart. You will be hearing more from the NAACP. Madam President wouldn't have it any other way. She don't deal with secretaries, so she needs your direct numbers. She don't do go-betweens. So thank you, Madam President, for even allowing me to be a part of this and to work closely with you at the NAACP. Thank you all, and you all have a very great night.
I want to thank everybody. All of us have our roles and many of us are doubled over, but we do, we will move forward with this. This is going to lead to even more and more calls to Gordon's office, asking, seeking for help. And we just have to make sure that we're there and that our voices are heard, and certainly know that the NAACP is all in when it comes to doing right by our people. Those of you who may be on and have not joined the NAACP, the only thing missing from the fight is you. You can join by going to our website, NAACPFTLBroward.com. That's NAACPFTLBroward.com. Join or renew, and let's get to work here. With that, we are going to close out. Minister Edwards, if you please. And thank you so much for everyone. To everyone.
Thank you, Madam President, and to all assembled. Let us go to the throne of grace. Most gracious Father, we thank you for this ingathering, for this very community collective. God, help us to remember that it takes the NAACP, the ACLU, it takes the public defender, the judge, the preacher, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the legislators, the politicians, and all members of the community for us to fight the good fight, oh God, for the cause of justice. Now, Father, we pray that you would grant us strength in moments of weakness, that you would give us clarity in times of confusion, wisdom in all ways, and that you, Lord, would be the wind beneath our wings. We ask all these blessings in thy darling Son's name we pray. Amen. God bless and keep you.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Good night.